I keep the folded napkin on my nightstand. Still have it. There's a small stain on one corner where my coffee cup left a ring, and sometimes I look at it in the morning before I get up, and I think about how a single sentence can end 37 years of love. Just like that. Clean as a line drawn in the dirt. That was the night my daughter became a stranger to me. I need to back up. Because none of this makes sense unless you understand what I built. Not just the house, the life. My name is Ronald, and I turned 63 last March. I spent 31 years running a contracting business in Dayton, Ohio. Started with nothing but a used pickup truck, a set of tools my father left me, and a work ethic that would have made him proud. By the time I was 50, I had 14 employees, a reputation that stretched across 4 counties, and a home I paid for in cash. Not because I was lucky, because I showed up before sunrise every single day, and I didn't stop until the job was done right. My wife, Donna, passed in 2019. Breast cancer. 14 months from diagnosis to the end. I held her hand every day of those 14 months, and when she was gone, I sat in our bedroom for 3 days, and I didn't eat. My daughter Claire was the one who finally knocked on the door and said, "Dad, you have to come out. You have to eat something. I love you." I came out. I ate the soup she made. I thought, at least I still have her. At least I still have that. Claire was 32 when her mother died. She had been married to Derek for 4 years by then. Derek sold insurance. He was the kind of man who laughed too loud at his own jokes and called everyone buddy within 30 seconds of meeting them. Donna never trusted him, and she told me so once, quietly, near the end, when the medication made her honest in ways she normally wasn't. She said, "Ron, watch that one." I didn't want to hear it. She was my wife and I loved her, and I told myself she was just tired, just worried, just the pain talking. I should have listened. 8 months after Donna passed, Claire and Derek hit a hard patch financially. Derek had changed insurance companies twice in 2 years, and commissions were thin, and they had a mortgage on a house in Centerville that was starting to feel like a stone around their necks. Claire called me on a Sunday afternoon. She didn't ask right away. We talked about the weather, about my grandson Tyler, who was 4 years old and learning to ride a bike, about the garden I had been trying to keep up since Donna used to manage it. Then she said, "Dad, we're struggling. We don't want to lose the house." I told her not to worry. I paid off their mortgage, $214,000. I wrote the check without hesitating because she was my daughter, and Tyler was my grandson, and Donna would have done the same thing. I didn't attach conditions. I didn't ask for anything in return. I just made sure the paperwork showed it as a gift with a retained interest clause, my attorney recommended, meaning, if the property was ever sold before I passed, I was entitled to 40% of the proceeds. Standard estate planning, my attorney said. Just good sense. Claire signed it. Derek signed it. Nobody made a big deal about it. Things were good for a while. I had dinner with them every Sunday. I watched Tyler grow from 4 to 5 to 6. I fixed things around their house when they needed fixing. I was a contractor for 30 years. I knew how to patch drywall and replace a water heater and reframe a doorway. Derek would stand in the kitchen drinking a beer while I worked, and he would say things like, "Ron, you're a lifesaver. Buddy, you're the best." I believed him. I wanted to believe him. A man who has lost his wife wants to believe he is still needed by someone. I started noticing small things in the second year. The Sunday dinners got shorter. Claire would say they had plans. Tyler had a soccer game. Derek's mother was visiting. I didn't push. I wasn't the kind of father who pushed. Then I stopped being invited to Tyler's birthday parties. Not directly uninvited, just not told about them until after. "Oh, Dad, it was just a small thing at the park. We didn't think you'd want to drive over." It was a 20-minute drive. I had driven 20 minutes to watch my grandson blow out candles every year since he was born. I mentioned it once to Claire. She got quiet and said, "Dad, Derek feels like you're always hovering, like you don't respect our space." I said, "Claire, I paid off your house. I come for Sunday dinner. I fix things when they break. How is that hovering?" She said, "I know, Dad. I know. It's just how he feels." I said, "All right, I'll give you more space." And I did. I stopped coming every Sunday. I came every other Sunday, then once a month. Then they stopped calling to invite me at all. I told myself it was a phase. Young couples needed room. Derek had his moods. Claire was stressed with Tyler's school and her part-time work at the dental office. I kept busy. I took on a small renovation project for an old friend just to have something to do with my hands. I planted tomatoes in Donna's garden. I drove to Dayton on Tuesdays to have lunch with my former foreman, a man named Gary who had been my right hand for 22 years and who always made me feel like myself again. Gary was the one who told me. We were sitting at a diner on Salem Avenue, the one we'd been going to since 1998, and Gary set his coffee cup down carefully and said, "Ron, I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to hear it from me and not from someone else." I said, "Gary, what?" He said, "I ran into Derek last week at the hardware store on Wilmington Pike. He was there with a realtor. They were talking about square footage and resale value." I said, "So they're thinking about selling?" Gary looked at me and said, "Ron, they were talking about the house like it was already theirs, free and clear, like there was no retained interest, like you didn't exist." I drove home and I sat in my kitchen and I looked out at the garden for a long time. I didn't call Claire. Not yet. I called my attorney instead, a woman named Patricia who had handled my business contracts and my estate planning for 15 years. I asked her to pull the original paperwork on the gift deed. She pulled it. Everything was in order. My 40% retained interest was documented, filed with the county, completely enforceable. She said, "Ron, if they try to sell without you, they can't close without your signature." I said, "I know. I just wanted to be sure." I watched and I waited. 2 weeks later, Claire called. First call in 3 weeks. She sounded cheerful in the way people sound when they're nervous and trying not to show it. She said, "Dad, Derek and I want to have a family dinner. A real one. Thanksgiving is coming up and we thought it would be nice. We're also going to have some friends over." I thought, all right, maybe I was wrong. Maybe Gary misread the situation. Maybe I was becoming a suspicious old man sitting alone in his house inventing problems that didn't exist. I said I'd be there. I brought a pie. Donna's pecan recipe, the one she made every year. The one that took 2 hours and dirtied every bowl in the kitchen. I brought it because I still believed, even then, in the possibility that everything was fine. Thanksgiving was at their house. There were maybe 16 people total, Derek's brother and his wife. Some couple from Derek's office I had never met. A neighbor named Paul who shook my hand too firmly and seemed to already know who I was. A few others I couldn't place. Tyler ran to me when I came in and hugged me around the legs and said, Grandpa, look at my new shoes." I crouched down and looked at his shoes and I said, "Those are fine shoes, buddy. Those are the best shoes I've ever seen." He laughed. He had his grandmother's laugh. I felt the tightness in my chest ease just a little. Dinner was pleasant enough on the surface. The food was good. The table was full. People passed dishes and told stories. And Derek told his loud jokes, and everyone laughed at the right moments. I sat across from Paul, who kept watching me in a way I couldn't fully read. I noticed that Derek and this neighbor exchanged looks a few times. Small ones. The kind you exchange with someone when you have a shared understanding that the other people at the table don't have. Then dessert was cleared and Derek stood up. He tapped his wine glass with his fork and he said he wanted to make an announcement. He said that he and Claire had made some exciting decisions about their future. He talked about a new opportunity in Phoenix. He talked about the market. He talked about fresh starts and new chapters and all the language that people use when they're preparing to do something they know someone else won't like. He said that he and Claire had been in conversation with Paul, who it turned out was a real estate agent, and that they had a very strong offer on the table for the house. I sat still. I looked at Claire. She was looking at the tablecloth. Derek said, "And we know that there's a," he paused. He chose the word carefully, "a complication with the deed. But we've talked to a real estate attorney, and we believe that with the right paperwork, we can address that." He smiled at me. It wasn't a warm smile. He said, "Ron, we love you, but Claire and I are adults, and we've made this decision for our family." I said, "Derek, I'm going to need you to slow down." He said, "Ron." I said, "That house has a retained interest clause filed with the Montgomery County Recorder's Office." You cannot sell it without my signature. I don't know what your real estate attorney told you, but that clause is airtight. I had it written that way on purpose. The table got very quiet. Derek's face changed. The social smile dropped away, and something harder came up behind it. He said, "This is exactly what I'm talking about. This is the problem, Ron. You think that because you wrote a check 3 years ago, you own us. You think you can control what we do with our lives." I said, "I don't think that. I think I have a legal interest in a property that I paid for, and that you cannot sell without my consent." Claire still wasn't looking at me. Derek said, "You know what, Ron? I'm going to be honest with you tonight because I think it's time." He looked around the table like he was gathering an audience. He said, "You have been a presence in our lives that has made it very difficult for us to be our own family. You show up, you fix things, you make yourself indispensable, and then when we try to live our lives on our own terms, you hold money over our heads. That's what you do. That's what you've always done." I said, "I've never held anything over your head." He said, "The deed, Ron. The deed is you holding it over our heads." I said, "The deed is standard estate planning that my attorney recommended and that you and my daughter both signed voluntarily." Derek looked at Claire then. He gave her a look, and Claire looked up from the tablecloth and she looked at me and she said, "Dad, we just need you to let go. We need to be free to make our own choices. And I need you to sign a release on the property so we can move forward." I picked up my fork. I cut a piece of pecan pie. I ate it slowly. It was good. Donna's recipe was always good. I said, "Claire, I need you to think very carefully about what you're asking me to do and what you're saying to me, right now, in front of all these people, on Thanksgiving." She said, "Dad, I'm asking you to trust us." I said, "Your husband just told a table full of strangers that I control you with money." "You haven't disagreed with a single word," he said. "You've barely looked at me since I sat down. I don't think trust is what this evening is about." Derek said, "See, this is what I mean. This right here." I folded my napkin. I set it on the table beside my plate. I looked at my grandson, who was watching me with his grandmother's eyes, and I said, "Tyler, come give Grandpa a hug." He climbed down from his chair and he came and hugged me, and I held him for a moment longer than I usually did. Then I stood up, and I thanked Claire for the meal, and I got my coat, and I walked out the front door. I sat in my truck in their driveway for maybe 4 minutes. I wasn't crying. I wasn't shaking. I was doing the thing I learned to do on job sites when something went wrong. I was calculating. I was looking at the full picture, identifying the load-bearing elements, figuring out what needed to happen in what order. Then I drove home. I called Patricia that night. It was late, close to 10, but she picked up because she always picks up. I told her what happened. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Ron, what do you want to do?" I told her. She said, "You're sure?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Give me until Monday." I didn't sleep much that weekend, but I wasn't miserable either. I was clear. There is a kind of peace that comes when you finally stop hoping that a situation will be different than it is. I had been hoping for 2 years. The hoping was exhausting. The clarity was a relief. Monday morning, Patricia called and told me what my options were. The retained interest clause meant that any sale of the property required my written consent and my signature on the closing documents. Without those, no title company would touch it, no mortgage company would lend against it, and no buyer could take clean title. Derek's real estate attorney, whoever he was, had either told them something incorrect or they had heard what they wanted to hear. Patricia also told me something else. Because the property had been purchased using funds from my personal estate and the retained interest clause was documented as a conditional gift, I had the right under Ohio law to file a lien against the property for the original amount plus interest if it was ever listed for sale without my consent and in violation of the documented terms. She said, "If they list it, you can cloud the title the same day." I said, "What else?" She said, "There's one more thing. The gift deed specifies certain conditions of the gift, including the expectation that the property would serve as primary residence for direct family members during the period of the retained interest. If they relocate to Phoenix and abandon the property, or rent it out, or attempt to sell it, All three of those actions potentially constitute a breach of the gift conditions, which would entitle you to petition for full recovery of the gifted amount. I said, Patricia, if I exercised that option, what would that look like in dollar terms? She told me. I said, all right, let's do this correctly, and let's do it completely. I want to be clear about something. I did not act out of anger. A man who acts out of anger makes mistakes. He moves too fast. He overlooks details. He gives the other side ammunition. I acted out of clarity. I had been a general contractor for 31 years. I knew that when you discover a structure is unsound, you don't argue with it and you don't wish it were different. You assess the damage, you document everything, and you make the necessary repairs, or you tear it down and build something better somewhere else. Patricia filed the lien within a week. The notice went to the property address and was recorded with the county. Derek called me 3 days later. He was not using his buddy voice. He said, Ron, what the hell is this? I said, Derek, it's a lien. It's my legal remedy, given the situation. He said, you're doing this to punish us. I said, I'm doing this because you attempted to sell a property with a documented encumbrance without disclosing that encumbrance to the buyer, which is a form of real estate fraud, and I wanted to ensure that was on the record. He was quiet. I said, also, your listing agreement is now void because no legitimate broker will carry a listing with an undisclosed lien. He said, you're unbelievable. I said, I hope you have a good attorney, Derek. Then I said goodbye. Claire called the following day. Her voice was different than it had been at the table. The certainty was gone. She said, Dad, can we talk about this? I said, of course. She said, we didn't mean for things to go this way. I said, Claire, your husband told 14 people that I control you with money. He said I was the problem in your marriage. He had a real estate agent at Thanksgiving dinner and a plan to sell the house, and he asked you to ask me to give up my legal rights to property I paid for. Which part of that didn't you mean? She was quiet. She said, I love you, Dad. I said, I know. I love you too. That isn't the question. I said, the question is who you are and what you believe, and whether what Derek said at that table was something you agreed with. She started to say something. I said, I'm not angry, Claire. I'm just asking you to be honest with me. It might be the most important conversation we ever have. She said, I don't know, Dad. He's frustrated. He feels like we can never make a decision without thinking about what you'll say. I said, have I ever told you what decisions to make? She said, no. But I said, have I ever threatened you? Have I ever withheld anything from you? Have I been anything other than your father? She said, no. I said, then what Derek was feeling was his own inventory to deal with, not a problem I created. I told her I would release the lien and waive the retained interest the day she sat across a table from me without Derek present, and told me honestly what she wanted, not what he wanted for her. Not a phone call, not a letter. A real conversation between a father and his daughter. She said she would think about it. That was 11 weeks ago. She hasn't called back. Patricia filed the petition for recovery of the gifted amount based on the breach of conditions. The process is ongoing. I am not going to tell Derek what the outcome of that process might look like, because Derek reads these situations the way a man reads a menu at a restaurant where he doesn't know the prices confidently until the bill arrives. I rented a small apartment in Sarasota, Florida in January, right on the water. I have a balcony where I drink my coffee in the morning and watch the pelicans. I brought Donna's garden tools, but I haven't found a yard yet. I will. Gary came to visit in February, and we sat on that balcony and drank beer and watched the sun go down, and he said, Ron, you doing all right? I said, Gary, I feel better than I have in 3 years. He said, good. I said, yeah. I think about Tyler. That's the part that costs the most. He had nothing to do with any of this. He is 7 years old, and he has his grandmother's laugh, and he doesn't understand why Grandpa doesn't come to Sunday dinners anymore. I sent him a birthday card in February with a picture of a pelican I took from my balcony and a $20 bill and a note that said, Buddy, whenever you want to come visit Grandpa in Florida, Grandpa will be here. I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. It said, Tyler loved the card. That was all. I saved the text. I'm not waiting for Claire to come around. I stopped waiting for things a long time ago. What I know is that I raised my daughter with every good thing I had to give, and I loved her mother until there was no more time left to love her. And I built something from nothing with my bare hands, and I gave it freely and without conditions except for the ones I put in the paperwork, which I did because 31 years of contracting teaches you that a handshake is a good start, but a signed document is what protects both parties when things go wrong. Things went wrong. I am 63 years old and I live in a one-bedroom apartment in Sarasota, Florida. And in the morning, I watch the pelicans and I drink my coffee and I think about what I want to build next. Not a house. Not a business. Something I can carry with me this time. Something that doesn't depend on whether someone else decides to honor what they signed. The napkin is on my nightstand. I keep it because it reminds me of the moment I stopped making excuses for other people's behavior and started treating my own life like something worth protecting. Donna would understand. She always understood before I did. I took the long way back from the grocery store yesterday, down the road that runs along the water, and the light was doing something extraordinary over the Gulf orange and copper, and this deep, quiet pink along the horizon, and I pulled over and I sat there with the engine off and I watched it until it was done. No one was waiting for me. There was nowhere I had to be. I thought, all right, this is what comes next. I turned the engine back on and I drove home.